Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Nathan Aguinaga. Nathan returns to the podcast to chat about his newest book, the soon-to-be-released Roster Number 50. Nathan is a retired Master Sergeant who served 20 years in the U.S. Army. He served as a light infantryman with additional skill identifiers as Airborne, Ranger, Jumpmaster, and Drill Sergeant. When he was last on the Success Insight podcast, we chatted about his first book, Division, Life on Ardennes Street, which was about his 10 years experience in the 82nd Airborne Division. In Roster Number 50, you're going to read about the author's personal experiences from beginning to end of attending the toughest combat leadership course in the military, the U.S. Army Ranger School. Nathan, it is a pleasure to have you back on the Success Insight podcast.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you for having me back. And it's a privilege to be back with you and your listeners again. Thank you.
So, Nathan, I have to say, first of all, just to get one book out there is, to me, it was like birthing a baby. Quite an undertaking, and it doesn't even compare to things you had to go through with the Airborne and in the Rangers. And now you have a second book soon to be released. For our listeners, for the folks that haven't yet gone back and listened to the first podcast, which obviously we want them to do, but give us a little bit of a backstory about who you are and how we came to having you back on the podcast today.
Well, Howard, thank you for having me back again. I'm from a small town in Michigan called Lapeer, Michigan. And I chose to join the military when I was a young boy. And when I was in the military, I wanted to do the toughest jobs. I wanted to be that infantry, airborne ranger, and all that hua stuff, as we say in the military. That's how I became where I was at and how I retired successfully from the military. And then after I retired from the military, I wanted to talk about my stories and proceed to write books about my military stories to the public. And that's where I'm at today. And I tell you, I'm proud of it.
Fantastic. I have to ask this. Typically, it would be at the end of a podcast, but let's get it out of the way right now because it's right on the tip of my tongue. If there was going to be an actor that you wanted to play you in the movie version of Division, Life on Ardennes Street, or now Roster Number 50, who would that be?
I don't know. I guess I really don't have an answer for that because, to be honest with you, a lot of the young actors, to be clear, I really don't know a lot of their names. But it would have to be somebody I would assume that would kind of resemble me, my height, weight, my youth at the time. Because you're talking 20 years ago when I went to Ranger School, almost 20 years ago when I went to Ranger School. But yeah, I really don't have an answer for that. That would be for a movie producer. I can say this, Howard, I'm not lying to you. I'm going to pursue, once my third book, because this is a 3-book series, as I talked about in our last podcast, this is a 3-book series of my events that all tie into Division, Life on Ardennes Street. I would like very, very much to be in contact with a movie producer because I think these 3 books would make a perfect 2.5-3 hour good movie about life in the 82nd Airborne Division and how everything all ties into it. My third book, I go into more detail, and which will be released in September. It's already contracted, which will go into detail of combat stories and my time as a drill sergeant and so on and so forth. Kind of a darker concept. My darkest moments in the military. It all ties in together.
Okay. Well, I definitely can see, we kind of painted on the canvas, so to speak, kind of a broad stroke of your journey, from, as you said, growing up in Lapeer, Michigan, and then really having your mindset pretty early in life that I want to be in the military. I want to have the toughest roles, take on those challenges. And as you shared in Division, Life on Ardennes Street, some of the life that you had to lead, those trials, tribulations, the challenges, and really the accomplishments that you undertook. Tell us a little bit now about the life of an aspiring U.S. Army Ranger.
It is one of the biggest rewards that you can get in that environment. I told you this on my last podcast as well. It is such a reward to be part of that crew, to be part of that elite crowd of individuals in the military. And it's not just Army. Ranger School is open for all branches of the military. I participated with Navy SEALs, Air Force, Pararescue, Marine Corps, Force Recon, and so forth. And I tell you, Howard, it was such a reward to be part of that crew, to be part of that special operations crew in the military. It'll never leave my mind. As a matter of fact, one of the best openings of the book was the foreword that I got from a gentleman that I actually served with, Colonel Rob Campbell in the 82nd Airborne Division. And he opened it up with the opening statement of, this could be a nightmare to those who have went to Ranger School, who have attempted Ranger School. Whether or not you earn the Ranger tab, this will forever be embedded in your mind, something to that effect. And I tell you, it was cool to hear that. That's how he opened up his forward. And that's a fact. It's a school that will forever be in your mind because of the physical and mental impossibilities that you may or may not perceive or go through in that school.
What does it take to apply to get into the U.S. Army Ranger School? I remember we were talking a little bit on the last podcast, the challenges, the tests, the accomplishments you had already have to have in place in order to get up to the next notch, so to speak, in your career in the military. What does it take in the moment to apply, at the very least, to get into the U.S. Army Ranger School?
Well, I describe it in the beginning of the book, how I was actually able to get into the school itself at Fort Benning, Georgia, because I was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. But I attended an academy down at Fort Benning called the Advanced Non-Commissioned Officer Academy, ANOC. And after ANOC, you were authorized at that point to walk onto Ranger School. But normally in the U.S. Army or military services, you have to pass a pre-Ranger course to ensure that you're going to make it through the course itself. And what that consists of is the physical fitness test. Again, I went through 20 years ago almost. We had to do 52 push-ups, 62 sit-ups, run 2 miles in 14 minutes and 50 seconds or less. And then after that was done, you had to do 6 dead hang pull-ups. And then after that was done, you had to do the combat water survival test. I describe all this in the beginning of the book, but normally you would have to pass a 2 to 3 week pre-Ranger course either at your unit or at Fort Benning, Georgia, where Ranger School begins and ends itself, where it's headquartered.
Is there a mindset that an individual needs to have before and I guess let me ask you this, are there women in the Ranger School?
There are now, yes. I think it was, 2 to 3 years ago that I was following in watch. There was 3 female soldiers that actually were allowed to start the first Ranger class for females. And I was impressed. They made it through. I'll be honest with you, I had no problem with it because prior to me going to Ranger School, I was a drill sergeant for 2 years at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And I actually witnessed as a drill sergeant, female soldiers that were more physically and mentally fit than some of the male soldiers. And I'm not kidding about this. They were tough. And so I had no problem with it. When I first heard about females being allowed to enter U.S. Army Ranger School, the question I had was, I hope they don't change the standard because they're female. And so, for example, I hope they don't have to just do 13 or 14 push-ups to pass the Ranger physical fitness test to get into the school. I hope everything still remains the same standard for both female and male together. And it was. I think there were 3 females that passed the first U.S. Army Ranger School 2 or 3 years ago, but they had to pass the same physical fitness standards that the male soldiers previously had to do. And I thought that was awesome. I was like, oh, good for them. I mean, good for them. My hat's off to them because it's tough. Howard, it's one of the toughest experiences that anybody could ever face in the world. And I described in detail that toughness and what it takes mentally and physically to get through that course.
Let's talk a little bit about that toughness, the mental and physical. Let's start with the mental tough. Well, what comes first? The folks that are applying to get in, going through the pre-courses, are the observers, the folks that are going to evaluate getting in? Are they looking at both simultaneously, the mental, physical toughness? Is there a chicken and an egg, which comes first? Or is it you just getting looked at, observed, evaluated, really in its entirety all at once? What do you think, or based on your experience, what was the determining factor of you getting in or even your comrades getting in terms of that toughness?
Physical fitness is probably the number one. If you're not physically fit, you will not make it out of the first day, which is called 0 day. And I described this also in the beginning of the book. If you're not physically fit, you're not going to pass the physical fitness test to even get into the school. When I got there at 3:00 in the morning, because that's what time you usually report, for me anyway, like I said, I went through 18, almost 20 years ago. When you get in there, first thing you do is you take a physical fitness test, and you're nervous about it because there's always been rumors or, scare tactics from guys that have made it through previously. And they always, something about the military, and I'm sure all branches realize this, if somebody graduates from a school, they always come back and they always try to say it was harder or more difficult than what it really is, to be honest with you. And so when I went through, it was the most easiest physical fitness test I ever took because I was such in good shape to even go through, because there were scary rumors that they would count your push-ups, for example, and it'd be 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. That's an example. But that's not how it was when I took the physical fitness test. They counted all my push-ups. They counted all my sit-ups. I passed the standard. And, that's the reality of the school and the mentality.
And the mental side of this, I can only imagine the hardships. Just the conditions, what you can't have. There's certainly no comforts. There's the water issues. There's the weather and sleep deprivation. How do you stay tough in those kinds of extreme environments?
You don't want to quit. You have to complete that course because when you go back to your unit, if you quit, and one thing about Ranger School that a lot of people don't realize, they don't just kick you out. Actually, it's hard to get kicked out of Ranger School, but it's easy to quit. And you might even get encouraged by the instructors to just want to quit. But you don't do that. You just want to keep striving on and be successful. Because if you go back to your unit knowing that you quit Ranger School, especially if you're in some of the units that I was assigned to, you're probably going to lose your duty position because you quit. And so, like I said, it's just hard to get kicked out. They normally don't kick you out unless you have an integrity violation, stealing food from other students, lying to the instructors, fighting. So integrity violations are pretty much the only way you're going to get kicked out of that environment. But it's easy to quit. And so you just keep going. You keep striving on. And not just Ranger School, but any other portion of the military, you just can't quit. You got to keep striving on. You got to keep going. People depend on you.
And as you were going through the school, are there some examples? I was going to use the word incidents, but let's just use examples that still kind of give you chills to this day?
Yeah, actually, pretty much the entire experience gives me chills that I'll never forget. Like when I wrote the manuscript for this, it was easy, very easy to write it because I always remembered every detail of the school. I did have to research when I wrote the manuscript. I had to research some of the knot tying, what some of the knots were called for, especially during the mountain phase and the rappelling and all that. I had to research a lot of that stuff, but the experience itself will never leave your mind. I can remember to this day pretty much every detail of U.S. Army Ranger School.
Okay. And, you just said something about the knot tying and the rappelling and climbing. Where did the course take place? Was it in one location or across multiple locations during the duration of the course?
Yes, it's multiple locations. So it starts off at Fort Benning, Georgia, at what they call Camp Rogers. And Camp Rogers is named after an old major from 1759 from the Revolutionary War who actually created the experience of Ranger School, their tactics, techniques, and procedures. And if you watch the movie The Patriot, those were Army Rangers that fought against the British Army. And, they lived in the swamps. They fought in the mountains, the Allegheny Mountains and stuff. So Ranger School itself goes from Fort Benning, Georgia, and then they call it Darby Phase, which is in the lower level of Fort Benning, about 15 miles away from main post, out in the woods, lower level. And then the next phase is Mountain Phase, which is in Dahlonega, Georgia, which is in the northern portion of Georgia, which is on the end side of the Appalachian Trail. And then from there, you parachute into Florida, the Panhandle, and you conduct your swamp and jungle training in the Florida Panhandle. And then you complete the school at what they call the Santa Rosa Island, which is in the Gulf Coast. And that's your final mission in Ranger School. It's crazy.
Yeah. Was there a point during the training, especially towards the end, when you perhaps knew, like, I got this is happening? Or does it require having this confidence throughout the entirety of the school?
Sure. To go through Ranger School to complete each phase, the three phases that I just described, the Darby, Mountain, and Florida phase, those are the three phases. To complete those, you have to pass peer ratings. You have to pass what they call spot reports to make sure you don't have negative spot reports. Like if you screwed up, for instance, if you got 3 major minus spot reports, which I talk about that I actually got in the mountain phase, you could be recycled in that phase. And then the final thing you have to pass is your combat patrol evaluation during that phase, and which is the most difficult because that's when you're actually starving because you don't eat. It's a 24-hour operation and you're carrying 80 to 100 pounds on your back. And I am not exaggerating about that. Anybody that listens to this podcast that's in the Ranger School will agree with that. You get through it.
When you came to the completion of the school, how is it being communicated with you that you have passed this? What type of ceremony is involved with this?
When you pass the school, and the instructors are not allowed to tell you during the training itself, they're not supposed to tell you whether you passed or failed. But between us and your listeners, you go up to them and you're like, Sergeant, did I, and you just look at them. You don't ask the actual question, but they'll tell you. They'll be like, hey, Ranger. And they either call you your roster number or they just call you Ranger. And they'll say, hey, Ranger, did I tell you needed to improve on anything? No, you didn't, Sergeant. Okay, that should tell you everything you need to know. So basically, they're kind of telling you without telling you that you passed that phase. And then, of course, the reward is you get back to Fort Benning, Georgia, back to Camp Rogers, and then you graduate the course. You're done with the course. I tell you, Howard, it's it's one of them things in life that I'll never forget, that it was just a reward,
Fantastic. And, you kind of alluded to my next question. On the book cover to our listeners, it's looks like the shoulder pad. There's a tab or tag with a paper clip of Ranger. And I want to ask you about that, by the way. But then roster number 50, you're given a roster number when you're in the school?
Yes, they assign you a roster number. Once you complete 0 day, by that night, or I should say the next morning, because you don't sleep, they assign you a roster number. And so my roster number was 50. And when you graduate, that's the reward you get. You get the Covenant Ranger tab, and they safety pin it to your shoulder. In Ranger School, you're not allowed to have your unit patch. You're not allowed to have any badges or anything like that. They basically strip you of your identity so everybody's the same. Everybody's shaved bald. There's no, kind of like basic training in a way. There's no identity. There's no personal identity. So you can't go in there and show off all your badges or what you've accomplished previously in the military. Everybody goes in there the same, stripped uniform, and then your head is shaved bald. And one thing I noticed with the female soldiers that attended Ranger School 2 or 3 years ago, the first female soldiers, they were also shaved bald as well. Their heads were shaved bald. Almost kind of like a G.I. Jane thing, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. I thought that was cool. Everybody has to maintain the same standard.
Yeah, I mean, there's no preferences. Everybody is the same. What happened, just to set a little bit of the stage for what's next? So you're graduated, you're back, Fort Benning. What happened after the completion of the school?
I'll tell you, the first thing you do, Howard, you go to Golden Corral or Pizza Hut or wherever, and you eat, and you don't stop eating. You'll sit there for 2 hours and just eat 3 plates of food, dessert, ice cream, and I describe all this in the book as well at the end, myself and my Ranger buddy. And you enjoy food and you eat. And I'll tell you, Howard, I know what it feels like to starve. I literally know what it feels like to starve. I know what the human body, I'm not a biologist or anything, or I've never had any biology classes in college or anything like that, but I know what the body does when you starve. After you burn all your fat off your body starts burning or eating. I don't mean to gross your listeners out, but your body starts burning muscle tissue, and you can actually smell it. And I describe that in the book as well. And it smells like an ammonia smell when you sweat. And when you get around a group of Ranger students, we actually ask the instructors, and I heard rumors about it, but I didn't know if it was true or not. But the ranger instructors would tell us, hey, your body is eating itself.
Oh my.
So now you're burning muscle tissue and your body literally deteriorates. And so that's the other toughness that you have to get through to complete that course. I describe all that in this book.
Fantastic. And one final question. You're 10 years out now since you retired from the Army. How does a ranger recognize another ranger out in public or on parade, or how are they recognized?
Normally we wear stuff. For instance, I'll be honest with you, I have a ranger sticker on the back of my window of my truck, or, I might wear a hat that says ranger on it, or a t-shirt, and people will notice you. I was at a Detroit Tigers game about 3 or 4 years ago, and I had a ranger baseball cap on. And one of the guys in the stadium, he pointed me on the shoulder. He goes, hey, what unit were you in? I'm a ranger too, stuff like that. It's just, it's a camaraderie, just like being in the 82nd Airborne Division or 101st or 10th Mountain Division or wherever, 1st Infantry Division. It's a camaraderie, and it's tough. It's good though. I mean, we're brothers. We'll always be brothers.
Always. And one question I did want to ask, when the school started, how many are in the school and how many rotations are there for the school? Is it once a year, or when one school ends, then another one starts? How does that work?
It's usually 11 to 12 classes a year, but when you start with a class of about 200, and normally the attrition rate is so high that 40% of that class that started will even graduate from the course. And then within that 40%, only 20% will go through first time go. Will be a first time through the entire course. And I'm proud to say I was one of those guys. I was one of those soldiers that made it through that 20%. I went straight through. I didn't get recycled. I had the potential to get recycled. I talk about that in the book extensively. During the mountain and Florida phase, I had to get what they call boarded, whether or not I was going to recycle that phase or even be removed from the course. And I talk about that because it's a course that people can turn on you. And like I said, like I described in the beginning, instructors can turn on you. Your peers, your fellow students can turn on you in a heartbeat. Not that I'm trying to be a victim or anything like that. It's a reality. And I'm not the only one. I guarantee it happens in every single class of U.S. Army Ranger School. I guarantee it.
Why would an instructor, perhaps I can see the instructor. I mean, in some respects, I think, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, there's a little bit of a mind game going on, or you look the wrong way, or you remind the instructor of somebody in his or her past. But why would another student be a potential impediment to getting through this?
Howard, that's a perfect question. Thank you for asking that. A student will turn on their peers for self-preservation, for their own success. I guess I don't know if I can say, because I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but I guess for their own self-success is the only answer I can give. But it happens. They'll for your listeners out there, I forgive me for saying this, but students will screw each other over in order to preserve their success, in order for them to get through the course. And I've seen it happen, and I'm sure it happens in every class. And as a matter of fact, I've had leaders that I had that gave me endorsement quotes or forward said the same thing. Like they actually said that they thought that they were going through the same course with me. And guys that graduated 35 years ago. I had a command sergeant major that gave me an endorsement quote that graduated in 1985 from Ranger School from the same course. And he said the same thing. He goes, that happens in every class. And that's just a reality of the school.
Okay. Fair enough. Hey, Nathan, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your writing, perhaps to connect with you on some of the social sites, where are the best places for them to go?
Well, my website is www.Aguinaga, and that's AGUINAGA.com. And I have direct links to Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And actually, I opened up my Facebook. I took off the security thing. So anybody that wants to just type in Nathan Aguinaga on Facebook, they can go directly to it, because I opened up Facebook particularly, to promote my books and basically talk about who I am. And that's how they can get a hold of me very simply.
Fantastic. And we will most definitely provide links back to your website, to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, book page from your publisher, Kohler Books. Also have backlinks to both books on the show notes on the Amazon site. Nathan, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you join us again on the Success Insight podcast. It's a fascinating story. And as I look back for myself, I don't know where I would have ended up, but I would love to have been in the military. I think that would have added a little bit of discipline, not in a negative way, because I wasn't that disruptive, but I think it would have been an experience that would have helped shape me. And I love where I am now, but I think it's something that I have to admit I'm a little bit envious. But having you on the show, having other guests on the show who have been former military, I definitely am grateful to, obviously, you probably hear it a lot. Thank you for your service. I think we throw that around a lot these days. Just having you on the show to share your story, and if you can inspire someone who perhaps has read the book, or someone suggests, hey, you got to go out and read these books, Life on Ardennes Street or Roster Number 50, you need to do it. So, no doubt you're going to inspire some folks to get out there and, see what they can be, see who they're going to become. So I really appreciate that. If there's anything that you would like to share before we end, what would that be?
Howard, what I want to tell your listeners out there that may or may not read or buy or read this book is it is easy to quit something that's difficult in your life, but it is more difficult to complete something that is hard in your life. And with that, you get a rewarding, successful accomplishment that you keep with you for the rest of your life. And that's how I feel about graduating from U.S. Army Ranger School. It was one of the hardest accomplishments I ever achieved in my life. And that's what I would like your listeners to understand. That's all.
Fantastic. And how do I know you're a Ranger?
Because I say I am. If anybody says they're Ranger qualified and they're not, they're going to get caught. Trust me. People are going to know that. You're going to get caught.
Of course.
Yeah. Because there's people are going to ask you questions. Like I said that when I was at Comerica Park up in Detroit watching the Tigers game a couple of years back. The guy asked me, "What unit were you in?" And I explained. Because if I would have lied to him, he would have looked at me and went, "Oh, you're lying." And so that's normally how it usually works.
Fantastic. And of course, I know for Airborne, it was Airborne all the way. What do we say for the Rangers?
Oh, I would like to tell your listeners, thank you for having me. Thank you for hearing my stories, buying my books, and our motto in Ranger School and Rangers as a whole, Rangers lead the way. That's what we say to each other. So to your listeners, Rangers lead the way.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that too. All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Nathan Aguinaga. He is a return guest to our show. His newest book, part 2 in a 3-part series of his life in the Army and just the journey he has taken from division life on Ardennes Street, now his experience in Army Ranger School, in the book Roster Number 50. And we truly appreciate Nathan taking time out of his busy day to share with us more about his journey. So do go out to his website so you can learn more about his work at naguinaga.com. And of course, we're going to provide the backlinks to his website on the show notes, as well as to all of the other social sites, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, the book page on his publisher, Kohler, as well as the backlinks to the books on the Amazon webpage. So folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay safe. We are still in the midst of a healthcare crisis here in this country and as well as globally. So, practice social distancing, wear those masks. And remember, it's not just about you, it's about everybody else. So again, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay safe, but go out there and have a phenomenal day. And we will see you on the next episode of the Success Insight podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.